Have you ever looked at the clock at 4:27 p.m. and felt your soul quietly plead, not again, not scream, not shout, just whisper, because screaming would mean you still have fire. But now, it's just silence behind the eyes as you nod along in another meeting, sip another coffee, and tell yourself, only a few more hours until I get my life back. But when does that life actually begin? At 6 p.m.? After dinner? On the weekend? During your 2-week vacation that disappears faster than your Sunday evening peace? Or has life become the gap between obligations, the brief pause between one shift and the next? You don't live. You recover between shifts. And recovery isn't rest. It's not joy. It's just enough decompression to endure another round. And somewhere in this loop, you've stopped questioning it. You've called it adulting. You've called it being responsible. You've called it normal. But deep down, you know something is deeply unnatural about it. There's a quiet violence in waking up to an alarm you hate, driving to a place you loathe, performing a role that numbs you, only to repeat it 5 days a week, 50 weeks a year for 5 decades. And the world applauds this cycle. They say you're a productive member of society. But productive for whom? For what? And at what cost? Imagine this. You're born with boundless energy, natural curiosity, and an innate rhythm. But from the moment you enter the system, that rhythm is hijacked. You're taught to wake up not when your body is ready, but when the bell rings. You're taught to sit still when you want to run, to ask permission to use the bathroom, to work for stars, grades, approvals, not wonder, not insight, not joy. And that rhythm of obedience doesn't stop at graduation. It just upgrades to direct deposit. Have you noticed how the modern workday mimics the classroom? Set times, limited freedom, scheduled breaks, constant surveillance, and beneath it all, a subtle pressure to conform, to comply, to never stop moving. Because motion keeps you distracted. Stillness is dangerous. Stillness makes you notice. Stillness lets the questions in. Like, why do you feel more alive on Friday night than any other time? Why does Monday feel like a sentence, not a beginning? Why do you count down to retirement instead of up toward purpose? What if this system wasn't built for your awakening, but for your sedation? What if the true function of the 9 to 5 isn't economic, but psychological? Not just to get work done, but to keep you so busy, so tired, so locked into routine, that you forget you're asleep? They don't need chains when they have calendars. They don't need prisons when you've built your own cage out of fear and finance. And they certainly don't need to censor you when you no longer say what you feel, because you no longer feel what you've lost. So here is the question no one wants you to ask. What if your job isn't just costing you your time? What if it's costing you your consciousness? What if the 9 to 5 is not just a schedule, but a spell? And if that's true, then what kind of life is possible when you finally wake up? The tragedy of modern life is not that you're overworked, it's that you're overwritten. Not just physically tired, but mentally scripted. Your thoughts, your schedule, your idea of success, all formatted by a system that rewards compliance, not clarity. You move, but not from will. You wake, but not with wonder. You follow a structure that seems neutral, alarm, commute, inbox, deadlines, yet it has an agenda to shape your consciousness without you even noticing. Michel Foucault called this invisible machinery the disciplinary society, a system not enforced through violence, but through routine, not through chains, but through timetables. Power isn't loud anymore. It whispers through structure. And the most efficient form of control? One that makes you control yourself. Think of the office, the factory, the school. All are designed not merely for output, but for internalization. You don't just do the job, you become the role. You learn not just tasks, but timing. You don't question why the workday starts at 9 a.m. You internalize that good people wake early, hustle hard, and stay available. Eventually, the cage doesn't need walls. You become your own warden. And what does this do to the soul? It creates what Aldous Huxley warned about, not a dictatorship of brutality, but a soft, seductive hypnosis. You are not forbidden from thinking. You're just too tired to do it, too overstimulated, too scheduled, too fragmented to notice that your deepest instincts, to rest, to rebel, to reflect, have been labeled lazy, unproductive, or dangerous. So instead, you conform. But it's a quiet, spiritual kind of conformity, not to any one person, but to the pattern itself. You wake when it says wake. You work when it says work. You collapse into your phone when the shift ends, because it's easier than facing the emptiness that's left behind. The system doesn't need to steal your soul. It just needs to keep you from hearing it. And the longer you stay in the cycle, the more it rewires you. Biologically, psychologically, neurologically, your brain begins to prioritize short-term rewards. Dopamine gets hit with every email, every like, every checkbox marked off your to-do list. The system keeps feeding you these crumbs, so you forget that you're starving. But perhaps the most terrifying thing it steals isn't time or energy or joy. It steals depth. Depth of thought, depth of feeling, depth of presence. You stop asking the big questions. Who am I beneath this job title? What do I truly want if no one's watching? What would I create if I had time? Not just to produce, but to be. But you don't ask those questions because your days are filled. Your mind is fragmented. Your weekends are spent recharging just enough to survive Monday. You don't have time to rebel. You barely have time to breathe. This is not accidental. It's architectural. Foucault showed how modern institutions, schools, hospitals, military, workplaces weren't designed for human flourishing. They were designed for predictability, efficiency, obedience. They manufactured docility, wrapped in the illusion of freedom. And Huxley warned of a different, more seductive control, a society so flooded with noise, entertainment, and comfort that people would come to love their servitude. You don't feel imprisoned. You feel responsible. You don't feel indoctrinated. You feel realistic. You don't feel numb. You call it normal. But deep underneath, something stirs. A dissonance. A haunting. A subtle awareness that your schedule does not align with your soul. That your busyness is a mask for your disconnection. That your productivity is a poor substitute for aliveness. And yet, you keep moving. Because stopping feels unbearable. Because to stop is to feel. And to feel is to realize that the life you're living is not the one you chose, but the one that was chosen for you. But what happens when you finally pause? When the noise fades, and you start to see not just the routine, but the consequences it leaves behind. That's where we go next. It doesn't hit you all at once. It arrives quietly, like a dimming of the lights inside your chest. Like a day when nothing is technically wrong, but nothing feels right either. You laugh when you're supposed to. You answer emails on time. You even get things done, but deep down you feel absent from your own life. This is the cost they never tell you about. Not the sore back or the tired eyes, but the subtle erosion of your inner world. The way your curiosity dulls. Your creativity slows. Your sense of wonder gets replaced by a spreadsheet of deliverables and deadlines. You stop dreaming, not because you no longer care, but because the part of you that once imagined has been buried under layers of repetition. You've become efficient, but not awake. You know how to multitask, but you've forgotten how to focus. You know how to survive the week, but not how to savor a moment. And the tragedy is, no one notices, because everyone else is living the same hallucination. We think burnout is the consequence, But burnout is just the final scream of a soul that's been ignored for too long. The real damage is quieter. It's the inability to feel joy without guilt, to rest without anxiety, to sit in silence without reaching for your phone, to be with yourself without needing to escape. This is not just about work. It's about attention, and how your attention is being harvested, not just by corporations, but by culture itself. We live in an attention economy, and if your consciousness is currency, then your routine is the mint where it's printed and spent. Each day, your cognitive energy is drained by micro-decisions. What to wear, what to respond to, what to post, when to reply. This constant decision fatigue leaves you too depleted to ask bigger questions. What matters? What do I stand for? What do I love? But here's the terrifying part. When you're trapped in the 9-to-5 loop long enough, you forget those questions even exist. You forget the shape of your own longing. You forget the scent of mornings without urgency. You forget the taste of a thought uninterrupted. Instead, you learn to chase simulations of meaning, promotions, praise, productivity streaks, even self-care scheduled like tasks. But none of it fills the emptiness, because it was never your essence that was being nourished, just your function. And when that no longer works, the system offers its next anesthetic: distraction, scrolling, streaming, shopping, anything to fill the quiet. Because in that quiet, the truth threatens to emerge, that you have betrayed something sacred in yourself. Not out of malice, but out of adaptation. And society calls this adaptation maturity, as if cynicism were wisdom, as if numbness were resilience, as if living without magic were somehow a sign of having grown up. But what if the opposite were true? What if the loss of enchantment is not a necessary step in becoming an adult, but a sign that we've mistaken survival for sovereignty? That's the hidden cost of the cycle. Not just the hours traded for money, but the parts of you you've silenced to keep functioning. The songs you never wrote, the books you never read, the people you never became. And maybe worst of all, the connection you lost to nature, to others, to yourself. You no longer see sunsets, you clock them on your way home. You no longer hear silence, you fill it before it can speak. You no longer know who you are, only what you do. The world feels flat, muted, predictable, like you're living on a set someone else designed. But deep within you, a part still remembers slow mornings, spontaneous laughter, the thrill of doing something not because it was profitable, but because it was beautiful. That part of you isn't gone, just buried, waiting. And the moment you question the rhythm, the moment you pause instead of producing, the system sees it as a threat. Because now you're not just tired, now you're aware. And awareness is the first act of rebellion. But rebellion isn't always loud. Sometimes it starts in silence, in the refusal to rush, in the courage to say, I want more than this. And that is where the next chapter begins. Rebellion doesn't always look like fire. Sometimes it looks like walking away from your desk at 3 p.m. and not apologizing. Sometimes it looks like sleeping in with no guilt. Sometimes it begins with one quiet, radical decision: to stop outsourcing your aliveness to a paycheck. But the real rebellion? It starts inside, not against your boss or your calendar or your inbox, but against the story you've been told. The one that said you're only valuable when you're productive, that your time only matters when it's monetized, that rest must be earned, that joy is indulgence, that stillness is laziness. And the first step in breaking that spell is realizing that the story is a lie. You were not born to be efficient. You were born to be free, to be fully here, awake, aware, alive. But freedom doesn't come from quitting your job or moving to the mountains. It starts with reclaiming the one thing they conditioned you to surrender: your attention. Because attention is presence, And presence is power. When you begin to notice, truly notice, how your days are designed, how your choices are shaped, how your emotions are managed, you start to see the bars of the invisible cage. And the moment you see the cage, you are no longer asleep inside it. You are watching it, questioning it, cracking it open. This is where the structure begins to shake. Not because the world changed, but because you did. You no longer respond on autopilot. You no longer accept urgency as truth. You no longer confuse exhaustion with virtue. You begin to set boundaries, not as walls, but as sacred spaces for your sanity. You protect your mornings. You unplug without guilt. You say no to meetings that drain you. You stop performing hustle and start practicing depth. And as you do, something strange begins to happen. The anxiety doesn't go away overnight, but underneath it, something steadier begins to rise. A voice, a rhythm, your own. You rediscover the lost art of doing nothing, not as laziness, but as rebellion. Because in a culture obsessed with noise, stillness is revolutionary. To sit, to breathe, to feel without an agenda. That is how you remember what it means to be human. You also start creating, not for likes, not for money, but for the joy of creation itself. You write, you sketch, you build, you wander. You return to the version of yourself that existed before the time card, before the resume, before the algorithm. And that self is not dead, just waiting for you to come home. But breaking free isn't just about reclaiming time. It's about reclaiming meaning, redefining success, rerouting your compass away from achievement, toward alignment. You start asking different questions. Not, how can I be more productive? But what makes me come alive? Not, how do I optimize my schedule? But what kind of life would I build if I trusted my body more than the clock? This is how the rebellion deepens. Not in a single act, but in thousands of small ones. Taking walks without a podcast. Saying no to urgency disguised as importance. Measuring value not by output, but by resonance. And no, it's not easy. The system doesn't want you to wake up. It will call you selfish, irresponsible, naive. But that's the final trick it plays, making you believe that choosing your soul is somehow immoral. Do it anyway. The world doesn't need more exhausted people pretending they're fine. It needs more conscious humans willing to step off the treadmill and ask, what if life is not meant to be managed, but felt? You don't have to burn everything down. You don't have to disappear. You just have to stop abandoning yourself. Because every time you choose presence over pressure, wonder over worry, truth over timeline, you plant a crack in the concrete, and enough cracks become light. There comes a moment, not loud, not traumatic, where everything suddenly feels unfamiliar. You wake up, and the light through the window hits differently. The air feels heavier. Your usual routine no longer fits. The emails, the calendar, the meetings, they still exist. But something inside you has shifted, not broken, not burned out, just awakened. Because once you've seen the pattern, you can't unsee it. And here is the deepest truth. You were never the problem. The fatigue, the numbness, the quiet desperation, they weren't personal failings. They were signals, clues, messages from the part of you that refused to fully die inside the machine. The system thrives on making you blame yourself. You're not productive enough, not motivated enough, not focused enough. So you hustle harder, sleep less, push more. And every time you collapse from the weight, they sell you a new productivity hack to carry it better. But what if the goal was never to carry the weight? What if the goal is to finally ask why you're carrying it at all? Because here is the paradox. The more you conform, the more invisible you become to yourself. And the more invisible you become, the easier you are to control. And yet they call this freedom. You are free to choose your job, free to scroll endlessly, free to buy your comfort back in pieces. But what is freedom without awareness? What is choice without consciousness? Real freedom begins the moment you no longer need the world to validate your existence. When you stop living reactively and begin responding from your core, not from the fear of being left behind, but from the truth of who you are, even if no one claps for it. This is not romantic rebellion. It's not quitting your job to chase sunsets with a backpack and a blog. It's not an escape. It's a return to yourself, to the breath, to the soul that has been whispering beneath all the noise. I'm still here. You may still work. You may still answer emails. But something is different now. You are no longer hypnotized. You no longer confuse purpose with performance. You no longer live to prove your worth. You live to be. And here's the final, unsettling, liberating truth. The 9 to 5 was never just about labor. It was a ritual, a psychological spell, a finely tuned architecture designed to keep your spirit on pause, indefinitely. But no spell survives the return of awareness, because once you remember, you begin to reclaim your time, reclaim your energy, reclaim your rhythm, the one that pulses underneath all the programming. And that rhythm, it doesn't run on urgency. It moves like nature, slow, cyclical, wise. It knows when to rest, when to bloom, when to let go. The real awakening isn't loud. It's a slow, sacred remembering of mornings that belong to you, of thoughts that aren't shaped by headlines, of dreams that don't require permission. You will lose things on this path: certainty, comfort, maybe even some people. But what you gain is yourself, not the version you crafted to be approved, the one that was buried before the rush began. And that is the life they're afraid of you living, not because it's dangerous in the violent sense, but because it's free, and a free mind is contagious. So if you feel restless, good. If the structure no longer fits, good. If your soul keeps whispering, there's more than this, listen. That is not weakness, it's truth. And in a world designed to keep you asleep, waking up is the most powerful act of all.